Hawatlo. My name is David Cobb. I have the honor of serving as the Wiyot Tribe's Advancement Manager for Dishkama Humboldt Community Land Trust. Many of you will notice right away that I am not Kali Akuno. I am sad to share that Kali has had to go to the hospital. He is okay. I want to let folks know right away that he is, it's not life-threatening at all. But in an abundance of caution, he has gone to the hospital. So I am stepping in his stead and what I will be doing is walking us through the session titled "What is to be Done?" And of course, for those of you who know, "What is to be done" is the name of a very famous pamphlet written by Lenin. It was actually called "What is to be Done? Burning Questions of Our Movement," in which Lenin outlines what he called a skeletal plan for going beyond fighting economic battles over wages, working hours, and towards restructuring all of society. So today, as we face ecological collapse, as we face not just late stage capitalism, but in my estimation, end stage capitalism, at least as it's been operating through the use of digital production and so forth, and witnessing fascism rising again in this country, we're bringing together key movement leaders, thinkers, theorists, strategists, and doers to ask them the question, posed directly to them, what is to be done? It's an amazing group of folks. We have Blair Evans of Insight Focus, Michelle Eddleman McCormick from Cooperation Vermont, Professor Rick Wolff of Democracy at Work, and Edget Betru of Community Movement Builders. Edget will be joining us a bit later. So I'm going to actually start directly with Blair Evans. Blair Evans is founder and director of Insight Focus, a production and training lab focused on the relationship between digital fabrication and permaculture and experiential learning and appropriate technology. That's all being done in Idlewild, Michigan, also known as Black Eden. Blair is committed to engaging people and understanding their own ability to live a well-lived life. Issues of self-determination, self-sufficiency, self-sustainability, it's all reflected in his work and at Insight Focus. Blair is a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's written multiple books, and I'm going to tell you, he has pushed me more quickly to really come to terms with what this third wave of digital revolution really means. And I think, honestly, y'all, this man may be on the cusp of helping us to solve the so-called computational problem. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for some introductory framing questions to Blair Evans.
Thank you, and really happy to be here. That was a tall order you gave me in the introduction. So kind of given the limited time, I'm going to focus on kind of what I'm attempting to add that may be different, as opposed to kind of confirming and building the connections between the overlap that we have. And so I guess my main central point is that, we understand the difficulties that we're dealing with in all of the multiple crises that are overlapping and feeding on themselves. And we are coming to understand more and more every day the time scale we had to work with, both the speed that we need to implement some options and the diversity of the need that needs to be addressed. And so I guess what I am interjecting is that there are also some technological things happening that have an exponential growth path and characteristics whereby they can help empower the shift that we're talking about from the excesses of capitalism in a way that localizes things in a meaningful way. So let me kind of frame it a little bit in terms of, I generally look at this kind of almost from a donut economics lens. We've got this planetary boundaries that we're dealing with. Life support systems, the planet itself only has a certain regeneration capacity, and we're exceeding that in many different ways. Which is not a good thing. Everyone knows that. At the same time, we're doing a real disservice to the majority of the people on the planet by not providing an essential social floor. So we're failing simultaneously in the two major areas. We're overabusing the planet, and we're not providing for the people on the planet or the other species on the planet what's necessary. And so, there's various ways that people have been talking about in moving forward to address this. And my concern is that the timeline that we have to address the issue is inconsistent with the time that it takes to implement some of the programs that we're all working on. And so what I want to inject is not a technological magic bullet, but something that may be able to be absorbed in the work that people are doing to speed up and empower the ability to do this localization and remove things from the system that's failing. And so the technology that I'm talking about are basically digital fabrication. So, we've been through, I think everybody realizes, a couple radical processes over the last 20 years or so that have produced digital communications and digital computation in ways that have restructured the way that we do things. Unfortunately, it's restructured by doubling down on stupid in the way that we're implementing the systems that we're trying to move beyond. But it's enabled globalization. It's enabled several different things that are going on that have exacerbated the faults in the system. And so we're in the middle of a third digital revolution, which we're in the early stages of, which is growing exponentially, just like the previous ones did. And, we're looking at the previous ones, having conferences, walking around looking at each other saying, what the hell just happened? How do we catch up with digital redlining? How do we catch up on all of these areas where technology has been absorbed into existing power structures and used to further reinforce the worst things? And so I would like to avoid walking around having a conversation in 20 years with another, what the heck just happened? And why didn't we seize the moment of this technological revolution in order to be able to make essential changes kind of in the system? And so digital fabrication, a lot of people think about it in terms of 3D printing, but that's not kind of the core of it. There's a whole timeline that will evolve over a period of time. Right now, it consists of things that look kind of like maker spaces and fab labs, but that's really a stage one. It's kind of like a mainframe version of computation. It'll progress moving into an era that's really analogous with biology, because biology is really digital fabrication itself in a natural context. So it is moving to the point where we can have the means to construct the things that we know how to describe using resources that are local to us and using methods that are within our control. And so kind of in a brief view, and Rick Wolff will certainly clean this up and hopefully correct me in a couple of ways. But, I look at, a lot of what we're trying to do in kind of the micro and the macro. And from a micro perspective, there's a lot of focus on democratic governance and worker ownership. And that is absolutely critical and part of what we're trying to do. And we're fighting against a kind of macro level ownership of the means of production and planning issues, whether it's central planning or whether it's market-based, analysis. And so what digital fabrication integrated in the proper way seems to allow and afford is for that ownership of the methods of production using locally available supply chains. And, Rick will probably draw the lines between methods of production and means of production and modes of production. I'm not going to attempt to differentiate with those, but the bottom line is being able to move the means of production in the context of local control with local supply chains, and being able to, within the context of a local environment, look at the needs, look at the loads on the ecosystem, look at the carrying capacity of the land, and make choices about what's to be produced and what's to be distributed and how, changes some of the basic mechanics associated with how do you operationalize this in a way that allows people to live in community with each other and community with the rest of the natural environment that we're dealing with. And so it's one of an alternative to the dominant mechanisms of capitalism, which provides people an opportunity to genuinely engage in the process of living, producing, consuming in community with a different worldview. And, you know, that adage about it's easy to act your way into thinking differently than think your way into acting differently. The idea is create the possibility now using early stage tools to begin to see how will we organize ourselves to be able to use this in a meaningful way, because industry is pushing that technology forward. I mean, I'm part of that process, but that's going to happen with or without us. It's an exponential curve, and we don't do very well with these exponential things. We usually chase them. And we always say, what the heck just happened, because these massive changes occur. Having analyzed the first couple generations of this, we kind of know the shape of the curve, and we kind of know the timeline of the curve. So the objective is a kind of plot and intercept course. I mean, we organize ourselves kind of at a linear rate at best, not exponentially. But if we know where the world is going to, perhaps we can organize ourselves to intercept the technology when it's really practical to completely deploy at a local level in a broad way. And what we're doing right now is to begin using the early stage technologies to simulate what that is like, to do practical things about producing durable goods based on resources that are local to us, but knowing the fact that this will be 100 times more powerful in a decade. And so that's kind of the real quick view, and I can spiral on the so what and now what parts of that, but that's kind of my quick framing.
A brilliant frame, Blair, and we are going to get into that next. And it has reminded me what Uncle Carl taught us. Hey, the purpose is not just to understand the world, but to change it. So I'm eager to get this conversation going. I also want to bring in to the panel Michelle Eddleman McCormick. Michelle is a mother of two and has been active in racial and social justice movements for the past 20 years. She's currently serving as the general manager of the worker-owned Marshfield Village store in rural Vermont. She's a member of the board of directors and co-founder of Cooperation Vermont and the Cooperation Vermont Land Trust. She's a coordinator of Regeneration Corps, a trustee of the Jackwith Library, and a member of the Planning Commission for Marshfield, Vermont. When she has a spare moment, and I can't imagine that there are many of them with that kind of resume, she enjoys fly fishing, kayaking, and traveling. Michelle, welcome to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you, Blair, for your opening comments. And I have to apologize to folks if I'm a little off center today. I'm sitting in the car outside the hospital in which Kali is in at the moment, doing well. He's doing, okay, but I'm in the car. So, so yeah, my thoughts, have really been on demonstrating what is possible, right? And so, Cooperation Vermont is, it's based in a small town in Marshfield, Vermont, and in some ways is a node, is a project of the People's Network for Land and Liberation, but in many respects is a project of the PNLL formation, in that it's very new, and it's in its formation still and evolving, and but was a really intentional choice of like why. So I moved to Marshfield, Vermont from Naples, Florida, in the hope to be able to establish a place and a project that could ultimately be an autonomous zone and ultimately be a place that's in preparation for the next generation of revolutionary thinkers and movers. And in light of the realities of climate change, right? The places that some of us, have been living in for a very long time, have, the environmental degradation has already taken hold, and the effects of climate change are not any longer theoretical. They're very, very real. And, places like, Jackson, Mississippi, where both, politically and environmentally and infrastructurally, the rapid disintegration is taking hold. And so Marshfield, Vermont, well, Vermont in general, and that bioregion has been determined by, folks who are much brighter than I am, to most likely be a much more climate resilient place, right? Not that, no place on the planet is going to be spared the effects of climate change, but it's projected to still be a place that, has clean air and clean water and farmable land and a political infrastructure that is or system um, that is permeable. I think that's the word, permeable. As somebody who doesn't put much isn't the word, any stock into electoral politics in our current, iteration of bourgeois democracy, I think that, so let me regroup for a second. Sorry. So the idea is to be able to implement all the strategies in one geographic area, to be working. So we purchased the Marshfield Village store, which is the center, of the community and a place of coming and going for really everybody in this small town, and to be able to build community with a broad cross section of the population, which is very homogenous in terms of race, but very diverse in terms of political and economic, background. And we converted it to a worker-owned cooperative, and are using that as a way to demonstrate to folks and to explain and to do education around, like, well, what is a worker cooperative and what does it mean and how do we do it? And so, continuing to seed additional cooperatives and looking at other mechanisms for furthering the ideas of economic democracy, and using the largely volunteer structure of our town and village government. We've got like 2 paid staff positions, right? And everything else is consists of volunteers who get together and form a committee to do things. And so it's like, well, what are all the things that can be done in that way? And how can we, plan for, the ability for our community to be able to, have enough food, not just for ourselves, but be able to, share amongst the surrounding, regions as supply chains start to become more and more difficult and to, or cut off, so furthering this, concept in a very real way of relocalizing. So again, the idea is like, can we take one geographic area and implement a wide variety of the tactics that we talk about when we're, moving towards a democratic and post-capitalist society? And I'm going to stop talking now and pass it back to David. Did I miss? You should fill in, David.
No, you were fine. You were eloquent.
Okay.
For those who have been joining, my name is David Cobb. A shout out to K-Mud Radio, where we're being simulcast live. The name of this session is What is to be Done? Kali Akuno was to facilitate this panel. He is in a non-life-threatening medical situation. He's gone to the hospital. He's fine, but I'm stepping in. We've got Blair Evans, who's already provided some framing conversation. We just heard from Michelle Eddleman McCormick. We're next going to Professor Richard Wolff, or Rick Wolff. Rick is the professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts, or professor emeritus, I should say. He's a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs at the New School University in New York City. He's the founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. He's written many books. His latest is The Sickness is the System, subtitled When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from the Pandemics or Itself. This book and many others can be found at Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism at www.democracyatwork.info. I'm also going to say Rick Wolff is without doubt the most famous Marxist economist who is practicing today and popularizing and making it understandable for ordinary folks. Rick, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, David. Thank you, all of you, for the invitation. I'm honored and very glad to participate. I've been making notes because what both Michelle and Blair have said are important things that I want to build on myself. So let me try to do what I understand was wanted of me here, was to provide a particular frame for thinking about where we go, what is to be done. By the way, Lenin did entitle his pamphlet, but he entitled it that because of the most famous novel written in Russian in the second half of the 19th century. By one of their greatest novelists, a man named Chernyshevsky, who entitled one of his novels, What is to be Done? And so it was Lenin's attempt to show in a very dramatic way that he's talking to the Russian people about what is to be done based on the critique of Russian capitalism that is in the Chernyshevsky novel. Anyway, here's what I think. I'm an economist, so bear with me if I focus on the economics. And I'm going to be simplifying a bit because of the limit of the time that we all have together. Here we go. In my judgment, the fundamental problem that hampers what all of us are trying to do, what was said by Blair, what was said by Michelle, and what is represented by all of the people that have been gathered in this conference and these kinds of conferences, which I'm happy to say are multiplying in the United States today. What is holding us back more than anything else, it's not the only thing, but it's the powerful obstacle in our way, has now to be confronted directly, explicitly, and relentlessly. And that is the power of a very small group of our citizens, namely the major shareholders and the boards of directors of the 2,000 corporations that absolutely dominate this economy. Big business, if you like. But let's be real specific. It's not all the people that work in the business, because the vast majority of people, let's call them what they are, employees of the corporate structure, have no power over its decisions at all. What a company produces, what technology it uses, where it chooses to do the production, and what it does with the revenue that it gets from selling what all the employees help to produce, all those key decisions are made by a tiny group of unaccountable human beings. Boards of directors typically have between 10 and 20 individuals. That's all. Major shareholders in a corporation are usually a group of 10 or 20 individuals. So we're talking nobody. We're talking a tiny group, and if I had time, I would show you about interlocking directorates, that the same individual sits on the boards of multiple of these very same corporations. It's incestuous in the literal sense of the term, and always has been. For those of you who like the statistics, the richest 10% of Americans own 80% of the shares. Shares are not a democratically distributed asset. And the way you get on the board of directors is you're elected by the shareholders. One share, one vote. If 10% own 80% of the shares, you now know who elects the board of directors, those 10%. And if you look closely, it's the 1% at the top of the 10% who have the bulk of what I just said. So it's a tiny group of people. If you look at the US Census, employers At most, the most generous interpretation, 3% of the people. The rest of us are employees. And that corporate structure, those 3%, to give them the benefit of the statistical doubt, make all the decisions with which the rest of us have to live. We don't elect them. We don't control them. We may have some control by electing the mayor or the city council person or the governor. We do not elect the people who own and operate the economic power of our system. They decided after the 1970s to move massive amounts of production out of the United States to Canada, to Mexico, to India, to China, to Brazil, and they are doing it every day. And they did it for one reason, to make money, to profit. No one held a gun to their head. No one required them to go. Those 3% made the decisions that deprived good jobs for millions of our fellow citizens, for the profit of the 10% who own 80% of the shares. If we do not confront that concentration of economic power, and of course you know as well as I do that they smartly distributed a large part of the wealth we all could produce to themselves. That's why we have a growing inequality of income and wealth in this country. And that's the only basic reason. There's no mystery to it. It isn't something that government policy had very much to do with. It's a decision that corporations made. In the 1960s, the ratio of a corporate executive CEO to the average worker, about 40-1. Today, what is it? 300-1. Who made that decision? Boards of directors and major shareholders. They decided to move production out of the country. They decided to give themselves gargantuan pay increases so we can all admire the space rockets that Elon Musk manages to blow up 30 seconds after they take off. Spectator sport. Jeff Bezos. What in the world are we doing? Recreating inequalities that didn't exist even back in Pharaoh Egypt. We have to confront this, or else we are playing games with ourselves. That's our problem. We have to do something, or else they will stymie, delay. Look at those of us have been worried about ecology. Who delays all the work that needs to be done? They do. They stall it off. They oppose it. And you know what else they do? They use the profits, and here's the irony, we all produce for them. We, the employees, produce the profits they use to buy the politicians to frustrate what we want. I mean, historians will look back at this system and wonder, what were we all doing? Asleep? Were we all doubling down on stupid? Blair's wonderful phrase from a few minutes ago. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is right in what Michelle was just talking about. In order to take away the power from those people who have been abusing it in their own interest for 2 centuries, we have to change the structure of the corporation, the structure of production. That's why Marx focused on it. It's not more important than singing or dancing or a million other things we do as human beings. He didn't focus on it because it's more important. He focused on it because people were unwilling to face it. That's why he focused on it. We have to face it. We have to change that power structure, or it is going to play with us in the future the way it has in the past. And what does that mean? Again, Michelle, it's the co-op. It's the bringing of democracy into the workplace, where it has been excluded from day one. All this celebration about democracy, we're bringing democracy. We can't bring democracy to the rest of the world because we don't have it here. How could we? When you cross the threshold into your factory, your office, your store, you're crossing into a place where someone you didn't elect, over whom you have no power, tells you what to do, how to do it, where to do it, with what machinery to do it, at what pace to do it, even when you can go to the bathroom to pee in the course of the day. And at the end of the day, everything you've poured your brains and muscles into, you leave at the workplace, and then you go home, have a beer, some pizza, and come back and do it again the next day. This is impossible. We're not going to break through on ecology, on civil rights, on the issues brought forward by the Me Too movement, all of it, if we do not change from the existing corporate structure to a democratized, one person, one vote community at the workplace, just like we have democratically formed rights in where we live, we vote on our political leaders. Why the hell do we not vote on them in our workplace? We can recognize different levels of skill if they're relevant. We can recognize as a community different levels of income if they're needed, for sure. We have discretion, we have the power. Let me conclude this way. And I don't want to be misunderstood, so let me say this is what metaphorical, what I'm about to do. For a long time, human beings lived in communities where they thought they had to have a king or a queen. Otherwise, the society would fall apart. You know how we knew it? Because the king and queen said it over and over again. There has to be somebody in charge. There has to be somebody talking to God to get clued in as to what to do and not to do. That's why we all had to bow down in front of the king and the queen to demonstrate, yeah, we need you, we depend on you. We are, to use the language they invented, your subjects, your loyal subjects. Wow. And then a day came when we separated the upper part of the body of kings and queens from the lower part. The French were very good at that. They had a special machine. The guillotine did it very quickly and neatly. And did the prognosis come true? Did society fall apart? Did it disintegrate? Did we turn out to really need a king? Not at all, not even a little. The only function of kings and queens, there are crude tourist attractions when you visit Buckingham Palace. Wow. But the kings and queens we thought we got rid of, they reappeared. They have a new life. They fooled us. They changed their identification and they have a new name. They're not called king and queen. They're called CEO. And they wield the same power inside the corporation that those kings did outside. If we don't get rid of the kings inside, we will be their subjects. And they will let us do what they will permit and block us from everything else. So for me, the way I would bring us all together is to honor what each of us do in our particular areas by uniting them around the demand to remove the obstacle to the progress we each of us want to make. In our personal relationship, in our family structure, in our access or not to abortion pills, and fill in the blank by getting rid of the single most important obstacle that we have not yet dislodged. It's not the most important obstacle in the sense that we don't have other obstacles that are important. It's the one we have not focused our attention on. And if I've learned anything in the last 10 years, and remember, as David introduced me as a Marxist, right? It used to be if you were introduced as a Marxist, everybody would look to where the horns came out of your head. I have no horns, by the way, never did. Here's what I can tell you. I have been able to function in this country more and more openly and freely in the last 10 years than in the previous 40. I'm on the radio and television. That's why some of you have heard of me all the time. I'm not disqualified because I'm a Marxist, nor do I run away from the label, no matter who. And I've been on BBC and Fox News and you name it, I've been on it. So we don't have to be so frightened anymore. We don't have to be worried that confronting the corporate power and the capitalist system, which puts them in that place, now's the time we can do it. Now's the time we should do it. And that's why I do what I do. And that's what I would urge us to make part of the answer to the question, what is to be done? A transition away from hierarchical, undemocratic corporate means of production to a collective, democratically run worker co-op type of economic enterprise. And I think that would be the best way to realize the fantastic image that Blair opened us up with of self-sufficient communities beginning through digital production to bring the economic reality under democratic control. It couldn't be more conveniently connected. So sorry to take too much time.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Rick Wolff. And I feel like you've literally set up the introduction to our final panelist, because Edget Betru is literally doing what you're describing, just as Michelle Eddleman is doing, just like Blair Evan is doing. Edget Betru has worked as a community organizer for over 20 years to specifically develop community control over resources and to fight for human rights. She has worked on and led statewide campaigns. She has placed community organizing with residents for fighting for power at the very center of everything that she does. She took this very same energy into her practice as an attorney, committed to the advancement of human and civil rights. Edget has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Spelman College and a Juris Doctorate, or a law degree, from New York University School of Law. She currently lives in Atlanta, Georgia, with her husband and 2 children. She is both a board member and member organizer of Community Movement Builders, and a friend and mentor of mine. Edget Betru, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. That's a hard act to follow, but I will start with saying greetings from unceded Muskegee Creek territory, otherwise known as Atlanta, where terminating a pregnancy is illegal, as well as teaching history and books are banned, but open carry is perfectly legal and welcomed. So considering all that, you might think I would say fascism is here, and so is ecological collapse, and we're doing nothing close to what we need to be. But I actually see a lot of signs of hope, and I do believe that we are doing, or at least trying to do, what needs to be done. And I believe that is building, that's why Community Movement Builders has co-ops. We do grassroots organizing. We try to provide housing, but I think building the alternatives that we need, both economic, social, which allows us to practice democracy in action, which allows us to create alternative production and distribution systems, which is what the People's Network for Land and Liberation is trying to do, while at the same time continuing to resist against and organize workers and oppressed communities, highlighting so that we are constantly highlighting and chipping away at the capitalist structure and highlighting the state's role within it. And I think, what Richard was saying about things have changed. What the discourse is currently is vastly different than what it was when I became politicized in the 80s and 90s. People were not talking about capitalism the way that they are now. And workers have options, not really. I mean, everybody is struggling more than they have in the recent past, but their ideas about how they can go about making a living has also changed. So the digital economy, the the Amazon, the Uber driving, all of that stuff has given people a little taste of what a different way to be a worker is. So giving, the idea that, oh, I can actually control my time. I don't have to wait for somebody to tell me when I can take my break, when I can go to the bathroom, when I work. People are starting to think about, oh, okay, I can decide when I work. I can decide how much I work. And after the pandemic, people are thinking about, well, how do I want to live? I want to spend more time with my family. Do I have to spend all this time at work? So I think there is a huge opening specifically to address capitalism, the structures that facilitated, specifically the corporations and the owners. And I think this generation is ready for it. So I'm optimistic. I think that just like we were shocked by the 2020 uprisings and we didn't expect that to happen, I believe there will be a next opening, and I believe that the issue will be economics. It will be capitalism, and the extent to which that we have created the containers and the mechanisms that people can plug into when that moment comes will determine how much change we're able to make and how much we'll be able to create the alternative ways of being that we're seeking. I can stop there because I think that it'll be more helpful to engage in conversation.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Edget. As always, brilliant, astute, and relentlessly positive. I love your energy. I just love to be around you. So let's actually ask our technical crew to please bring Rick Wolff, Blair Evans, Michelle McCormick back in front of the screen for those of you who are watching us on video. And we're going to do exactly what Edget just said, a kind of discussion. So what I'm going to do is, there's been a very rich dialogue going on in the chat. Nicola Walters has done us the favor of gleaning a couple of key ones. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read two and then invite folks in a round to react to either both or whichever one you want. I'm going to try to get as many of these voices into the conversation as possible. And we'll do it we'll just do rounds. So each time, rather than call on people, it'll be Blair, Michelle, Rick, Edget, right? We'll do that. And I'm going to jump right into the first two questions. You can address both or either. One, historically, socialists have not been supportive of government support, bourgeois Democrats and others, of cooperative business development. But do you see that stance changing, and how should we react to that? And two, decolonizing economics is about recognizing and building our collective solidarity. What will it take for our rather fractured movements to build this solidarity? Related but different questions. Let's start with you, Blair.
Okay, this will be a good one to frame kind of my background. So I'm an engineer, computer scientist, complex systems dynamics guy. So take everything I say with that grain of salt, if you will. And so, and a lot of this kind of goes to part of what Rick was talking about, and I'll kind of frame it in the context of the means of confrontation, because I'm in violent agreement with everything everyone has said. And so, the approach to, I don't put a lot of hope in government adopting a position which is constructive to deconstructing capitalism, right? And so let me draw a quick thread through what we're doing to kind of indicate the difference. I mean, we started the digital fabrication stuff in Detroit. It's kind of revolutionary town, got a lot of radicals. a lot of people were interested in using, this ability to produce locally to do something. But the reality of life is I got at least one foot in this capitalist system, which has got me in hyperdrive. So I got maybe 10% of my mental cycles to think about doing something else. And that shift was never going to happen, right? So we were authentically kind of thinking about how do you allow people to completely participate in a mechanism whereby they can invest all of their time and energy into actually producing the end game, as opposed to trying to figure out how to coexist with impractically with the burdens of capitalism as it stands. And in the city of Detroit, that was a very difficult thing to do. So we were integrated in another town that's in a rural area. It's got a history of Black coopetition and finding a way with no way during segregation. So, we aggregated some things, 60 acres, it's got agricultural land and some other things. So the point is to create an environment whereby people can actually live the life, right? Now, part of that is what life do you want to be living? And can you get away from some of the stuff, the needs that, we're sold that, we need to buy into to drive consumption of a lot of nonsense. But the point is to kind of get to understanding the land we're living on, understanding our relationship with the land, understanding what it can produce, growing some industrial hemp over there that will then process into the house over here. We're just getting to a point in digital fabrication where we're using fab labs to make fab labs, and we can make our new machines so they use the materials that we have available locally as opposed to stuff that has to be imported from someplace else. So the whole, our hope is around allowing people to genuinely engage in the process of being in relationship with the land and each other, and actually owning the means to create the means of production. We cannot just make stuff, we can make stuff that makes stuff. And we can make that within our ethical framework of how we want things to work. So, my hope and expectation is that, I have a lot of faith and confidence in the fact that we can provide people with an alternative pathway to suffering within the limited confines of capitalism. If more people start doing that, you stop feeding the monster that's eating us. Capitalism, at some point in time is going to collapse under its own weight. And there's a lot of fractures that are developing. I'm not saying it'll be gradual and it'll be a easy death. There's a lot of death throes and violence that happens during that process. But I guess my focus isn't on the government adapting to a more kind way of doing things, nor the corporate structure adapting to a more kind way of doing things. And, given our environment of surveillance capitalism and hyper effective marketing and a lot of other things, frontal assaults, I don't put a high probability of success. Although all of the techniques that folks are talking about, and this little slice of digital fabrication of one technology in the mix of the social technologies and all of the other things that people bringing into place. And a core part of what we're trying to do here is integrating, the cooperative mechanisms, the community land trusts, the land conservancies, to be able to actually have people genuinely participating in making decisions about everything that's necessary to guide their individual, family, and kind of collective life. That's a long way of saying I don't put a whole lot of hope in directly changing the system. I put some hope in developing an alternative system that doesn't require the existing system to support it. And we'll see after we get halfway through how violent the existing system is against the interlopers. And then we handle that as it evolves. So that's probably not exactly the answer you're looking for, but that's my interpretation of the question and how I would respond to it.
I love, comrade, to hear your engineering mind code switch, and you are pushing and educating me, and for which I am profoundly grateful. Michelle, let's turn it over to you.
Yeah, so a couple things that came to mind, being somebody who's not an engineer, nor an economist, nor an attorney. As my good friend Leo Stegman from the Bay Area used to say, I'm just a revolutionary in need of a paycheck. And so, in thinking about that, right, like I've spent, a good chunk of my life kind of wrapped up in this nonprofit industrial complex, right, where we end up doing a lot of things that we think are I don't know, sometimes what we think we're doing, but it ends up being very co-optated, like charity-based work that, tends to kind of, feed into the exact systems of oppression that we're trying to hope to challenge, right? And so where am I going with this? My point is, right, if you are revolutionaries who still need a paycheck and you're working within a nonprofit organization, work with your coworkers to make it a worker-directed nonprofit at minimum, right? Let's start to model those same values, the processes, and the principles within our own setting. Be revolutionaries where we are, right? And if we can create enough actual local change that we can be connecting these, changed organizations to each other, we can start to build, movement within there. And the other thing that, I just want to, challenge, because sometimes I'm surprised, right? Like people really still think this. And so I just want to go ahead and say it, right? If you are one of those folks that is sitting there thinking about the government and the danger to our democracy and that we're teetering on some sort of, threat to our democracy, please let that illusion go. This democracy is working exactly the way that it was designed to do. Right? This is a bourgeois democracy. This is not a real democracy of the people. This is a system that is designed specifically to protect at all costs private wealth and capital, right? So if it crumbles, it crumbles. But what are we demonstrating in the meantime as a viable alternative? What are we doing in our workplaces? What are we doing in our communities? What are we doing in our homes? What are we doing in our neighborhoods to demonstrate the alternatives for how we start, to self-govern, right? How do we implement those tools of democracy? And again, are we using sociocratic, methods within our organizations, within our workplaces, within our neighborhood associations? What is it that we're doing to demonstrate where we are, those alternatives? And being able to successfully demonstrate them, even in their microcosm, opens up conversations that are much more real and tangible to folks who otherwise don't know what we're talking about. So I'm going to pass with that.
Rick Wolff, you're up.
Okay, I go back to history for much of whatever I can figure out about the way we live now. So I am very respectful of the tradition of socialism in the 19th and much of the 20th century, despite its focus on the government. I think their understanding is worth our remembering. They understood very well the power of capital, but they felt that they had an alternative way to change society. And that was by mobilizing the working class, by voting their way in to political power, or by a revolutionary upsurge. They would grab the state, seize the state, and use the state to help socialists make the transition to another stage, a post-stage. And on that basis, socialism grew spectacularly across the 19th and 20th century. They have nothing to be ashamed of, those socialists, but I do believe they made a big mistake. What they didn't understand were two things. One, that the bourgeoisie, the capitalists, understood very well the danger of combining capitalism with universal suffrage. You're giving the majority to the working class. That's going to be a problem sooner or later. So you better control the government to make sure that the numerical supremacy of employees over employers could not go where it might if you didn't control. And that's why they've bought every government in the capitalist world, including ours, hook, line, sinker, the whole business. And that's why we're always frustrated by a government that doesn't do what the mass of people want. Even when the polls show the majority want access to abortion, or the majority don't want the war, or the majority want less inequality, what difference does it make? We know where the government is going to go, and they've worked out the donations and the funding to make that possible. So the socialists underestimated how the capitalists could, in fact, capture the government. Then they discovered the same lesson in another way. They did seize the government. Russia, 1917. China, 1949. They seized the government, they had it, but the transition to something beyond capitalism, they didn't manage. And for good reasons. I'm not a Monday morning quarterback. I would have done likely what they did. But they didn't understand that if capitalism is that structure of a tiny group of people owning and operating and running the business and a mass of employees, you don't get beyond capitalism if you change the capitalist from a private citizen to a government official. It's not enough. So we learned again that seizing the state could be part of a process, but it isn't the be all and the end all. And I think most people in the world know that one way or another. I don't think you can mobilize the working class in America or anywhere else on another project to seize the state. Because in a way, whether they say it or not, the reaction of the working class will be, we've been there, we done that, it didn't get the results. Not here, not there. You got to come up with something else. The worker co-op as an alternative to the capitalist employer-employee model is a new defining vision for what socialism means. It catches the population unaware. They've been thinking socialism what the government does. We're not even talking, we don't care. I'm exaggerating, but I want to make the point. We have an alternative vision that is going to change your life right now, because you're going to become in charge of your workplace, you and the fellow workers. It's a whole new idea of what socialism means. And because it's wrapped up with real democracy, it already has half the approval of people, even if they don't quite get that democracy could mean multiple things. So here's my vision, just where my head is. We need a political party that says what we are all about. And it needs to be grounded in worker co-ops. It needs to be the political arm of the worker co-ops, pushing for the laws, pushing for the agreements that facilitate building worker co-ops. At the same time that the worker co-ops benefit from having a political voice, the political voice has a base in the co-ops, where they can recruit, where they can raise money, where they can build support. Now you have well, guess what we have? We have the 21st century analog to what once was socialism's strength, the coalition between a socialist political party and the labor movement. Aha, now in the 21st century, we could have a coalition of a new political voice with powerful base in the labor movement and a powerful base in worker co-ops. That's a recipe, I think, for how we could go forward, uniting what we all do without disrespecting the difference. And we have different things we emphasize, and that's fine. In all the old socialist parties, they had people working on what they called women's issues or civil liberty issues or economic organizing or labor. We can manage that coalition as well with a vision of the future that this system is very poorly prepared to fight against. The democratization of the workplace. That's a slogan that can take us a long way from where we are to where we're trying to get.
Thank you, Rick. I got to say, what I'm hearing from Rick and Michelle and Blair Evans, may I say, modern day applied dual power. That's where my head went.
Yeah, that's right.
Edget, let's bring you into this conversation.
I agree. I think it's a combination of those things. I think cooperatives are already starting to take hold, worker cooperatives, as well as a collective stewarding of land in various formats and models. I think, I don't know if we want to call it a party, but whatever this network entity also needs to include tribes. It needs to include, there's many, I believe there's many folks doing this work of creating the alternative in many different ways that need to be networked, right? And I mean, Blair, I think from beginning of the creating the actual means of production and being able to reproduce that and having that in the people's workers' hands is a huge leap, I think, a huge advancement that would allow us to really have a real basis for this alternative. So I think connecting all of those things as we're doing that also, I think really recreating who we are as human beings, to kind of purge ourselves of what living in this capitalist society has done to us, how it's shaped our consciousness, how it's shaped our relationship to each other. And I think so engaging in all of these projects, workers cooperatives, production cooperatives, organizing, we're in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, creating land trusts and collective housing tenant situations, all of that to me is also an opportunity for us to change how we relate to each other, which is a necessary part of creating this the alternative that hopefully we will survive the repression and the violence we know will come as capitalism crumbles.
Thank you. I'm going to take moderator's privilege and acknowledge. So I work right now on a question of how to scale up and out these principles with Edget Betru and Michelle Eddleman McCormick and Blair Evans and Kali Akuno and Kamal. Like there's a group of us who are on this. So I'm literally I'm owning my vested interest in hearing all of you answer this very question that says, let's say we do actually have a worker-owned cooperative movement that really begins to get a mass movement. How long will it take to reach a critical mass where American politics could actually transform and change, and we could correct so many of the historical wrongs that we all know have happened? Like, what is that moment where it goes from, you know, just quantitative changes to qualitative changes across superstructure? And I'll just invite anybody to react to what I've just heard or what I've just said. Rick, hit it.
Okay, great question. And I love your choice of the old dialectical story about quantity and quality. You know, Engels, Marx's partner, loved to write about the dialectics of nature. And he wanted us to remember the story of water, just so it's in everyone's head. You know, you change the temperature of water and it just gets a little warmer. And then at a certain point, it becomes gas. It changes its quality. And if you go the other way, it gets cooler and cooler as a liquid, but then suddenly it becomes a solid. You get the difference between the, so it's a question of, as we move forward, and as Edget said, she feels, and I agree with her, that we are moving forward, even if we're frustratingly sad about the pace at which we're moving forward. But that reminds me of a sentence of Lenin, and then I'll get to my answer. Lenin was asked at one time by frustrated colleagues, why is it taking so long? Kind of what we're saying to each other here. And, you know, it's taking so long. And Lenin's answer, very famous, written down by one of the people, or made up by that person who will never know. His answer was the following: for decades, nothing happens. And then in a few weeks, decades happen. Okay, I think that's right. And I want to give you not my guess about how long it'll take. It's as good or bad as any of us could come up with. But I want to give you a concrete example of where something has happened. My family is French. My father was born in France. I grew up, I speak French and blah, blah. So I keep track of that country because it's where what's left of my family lives. French politics is radically different in the last 10 years than what it was for the previous 100. Why? Something has happened. Before the pandemic, you all noticed it, I'm sure. It was called the Yellow Vest Movement, Gilets jaunes in French. The pandemic broke everything down there like everything else. Now the pandemic is over, and the left, the yellow jacket movement is back again, stronger than ever. It unifies there are 8 labor federations in France, 8 equivalents of the AFL-CIO. All of them are in the streets now, all of them, and they have been for weeks. And the next big demonstration against the president is scheduled for May Day across France. They brought out millions and millions of people week after week now for months. The Yellow Jackets forced the government to withdraw its plans to tax fuel. This time the struggle is over the length of the when you can retire and get your pension, for those of you that care about the details. But that's not the only unification. The student movements of the universities have allied themselves with the labor movement. They haven't seen that for a long time in France, and on a scale we've never seen, not even in 1968, which was the last time you had something close to this. And here's the best part. For the first time in my memory, the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, the spin-off small Trotskyist Party, the core left of France, unified, didn't run separate candidates in their elections, which they normally do. They unified around a man who, if you haven't heard his name, you should learn about him, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He ran for president on the United Left in the first run of the presidential election. I want to give you the results. 3 candidates ran. Macron, the guy who's the president of France now, Marine Le Pen, a right-wing, semi-fascist, anti-immigrant party, and Mélenchon, the representative of the left. Macron got 27% of the vote in France. Marine Le Pen got 23%. Mélenchon, 22%. Had the Greens, which is a left-leaning party, joined with Mélenchon, which he asked them to do, they got 4.6% of the vote. If you add those to Mélenchon, he's the president of France. That's not a big lift. Half those Greens would tomorrow vote for him. They brought themselves together, they presented a unified candidate, and they did better than anyone predicted, because the support of the left, when you offer them a unified plan and program, and Mélenchon is now in the street with the unions and the students every day, bringing the millions out. Everyone didn't think it could ever happen. And suddenly, in a matter of weeks, it all happened. Had it not been interrupted by the pandemic, it would have taken even further forms. And even if Mr. Macron can get his undemocratic, he had to push this pension through by a 100-year-old law because he couldn't even get his own party get a majority vote in the French parliament, which is part of why the protests are. All polls for the last 7 weeks have indicated that 70% of polled French people support the demonstrations, and are against the government. Mr. Macron, I can assure you, is history. He's done. He will never again be a significant politician in France. He's doing what the ruling class wants, solving their budgetary problems by lopping off 2 years of entitled pension. So all workers who reach age 62, which is where the pensions began in France, since they're way ahead of the United States on all those issues. He's taking away 2 years, so the worker has to work until age 64. During those 2 years, workers will put money in to the pension fund. And by delaying their retirement 2 years, it'll be 2 years less of taking money out. That's the way the problem is solved. It's an attack of the bourgeoisie, the capitalists in France, on the working class to solve the budget problems that the working class had nothing to do with in the first place. It's a straight out conflict between the mass of people, the government, and the ruling class. And of course, it gets no attention as that in the American media, but it is an example of where you can go. And France and the United States are not that different in the basic structure of their societies.
Can I
So,
comment
Blair,
on
hit it.
that and ask a question? And give Edget a time, an opportunity to make it less depressing than I'm about to present. So, I mean, the first thing that came to mind relative to this question, I mean, I grew up in a kind of multi-generational movement kind of context, right? These things, you know, you do what you need to do, you got to set the stage for this to grow, for that to grow. And as I got, you know, more involved in, you know, business and the system dynamics and starting to look at this stuff, and it's like, we don't have multiple generations to resolve some of these issues, from an ecological collapse point of view, from a resource competition and political edginess kind of point of view. But another aspect is the role of automation in this. And I'd be interested in getting your perspective on this, Rick, and that workers aren't as important as they used to be, right? Through, you know, mechanical automation and intellectual automation, you know, not just the hype about Chat GPT, but I mean, there's a huge amount of things that are going into, as capitalists will do, reducing the cost of labor. And if you can eliminate it, that's the best reduction possible, right? And so, you know, as I'm kind of plotting the timeline of system collapse and collapsing of a system that we're totally dependent upon because we've lost our ability for any self-provisioning or self-determination in terms of the necessities of life. You know, the timeline on that versus the timeline of creating these dynamics. And I don't know the answer, but that's what keeps me up at night. And so, you know, that automation portion, and, you know, how long do we have to be able to make substantive changes in people's lives? And, you know, to me, changing the system, you know, is one thing, but changing people's ability to deal with life, which requires changing the system or opting out of the system. You know, so that's, I mean, one thing I would have is that, you know, to me, the transition is on the other side of the collapse. So that's my answer to the question, which is why, you know, I got my pedal to the metal trying to figure out other leveraging mechanisms to distribute to everybody so that folks can integrate it into their work to be able to do what they're doing faster. But I'm interested in whether, you know, you think that's a perverse perspective or you know, what's your take on that?
So Rick, before you answer the direct question, I am going to bring Edget and Michelle into a reaction.
By all means, by all means.
Then kick it back to you. And then just to let folks know, this will unfortunately be likely the last opportunity. Then we'll do some closing words. So let's go Edget, Michelle, and then back to Rick for this particular question.
I agree with Blair. The transition may be, I think the transition has to start now. But I think the brunt of it, or the qualitative leap, will come after the crisis. But all we can do is build it, do exactly what you're doing. And I see, you know, locally in Atlanta, even I see things that I didn't see just 10 years ago, which is farming, you know, like urban farming, rural farming, with the understanding that we're going to have to provide for ourselves, is becoming mainstream. People are getting their groceries from farmer markets, from local farmers, you know, that come every week, rather than always relying on going to these big box grocery stores. So that's a shift that's already happening. I also see something which I didn't see in my organizing in the past, which is all the kind of radical organizing that's happening now, whether it's around Stop Cop City, the prison industrial complex, or organizing around immigration. all of it now includes mutual aid, which was not something that happened in the past. So, and it includes mutual aid both for folks who are actually engaged in organizing and in struggle, but also the community. So I think we're making the road as we as we walk it. But I don't know, I don't know if we will be able to create. I think traditionally we used to say something like 30%. If we can get 30% of the population on our side, we can win. So I think something, similar, maybe we need at least 5% of the population to actually be building these alternative institutions, and maybe another 10% to be engaged in, maybe as consumers, cooperative consumers, or in some way actively participating in some sort of, democratic structure that allows them to engage with these alternatives that we're creating. And then, that's, with maybe 15%, and an opening, some sort of opening that then, brings in more folks, I think we have a chance.
Michelle?
Yeah, I'm with Edget. I think we have a chance, right? And I'm usually the most pessimistic person in the room. I always sound pretty doom and gloom about stuff. I'm over here apocalypse planning in central Vermont. It's cool. But some advice, and I think this applies, it's metaphorical, but my dad used to give me about life, like when the house is a complete and utter mess and it's just shit everywhere, just do the damn dishes. Just do the dishes, right? The thing that is in front of you, the community that is in front of you, the people that are around you, get to work. Do the thing, right? And then when you've got the thing done, when you've done the dishes, start to look around, start to work with other groups that are around you, coalesce around the people who are doing the good, people who are working on different kinds of things. People who are working on mutual aid aren't talking to the people who are working on healthy soils. People who are working on land trusts and trying to decommodify land aren't talking to people who are, trying to figure out worker cooperatives in their community. We've got to start bringing people together in a geographic region so that we can start coordinating, start collaborating, start building together. And the other thing that I've become really cognizant of that, maybe years ago, I wouldn't have felt so strongly about, but there's a million trillion things I have zero experience in. Zero. I've not one time led a participatory budgeting process. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I haven't done. But what I'm realizing is, as fragmented as we feel like our movement is, right? The reality is that I'm only 2 degrees of separation from somebody who's quite good at just about anything I can think of that needs to be done. Right. And so just, to take solace in or hope, if that's the word, maybe it's solace, in that we don't have to be, the masters of all of these different kinds of techniques for moving our systems forward, that there are folks out there that, are working at universities and institutions and, different organizing entities where these expertise exist, and folks are willing and ready and have the skills to help us to implement these projects on our local level, right? So yeah, just do the damn dishes, don't lose hope, stay focused. And I'll pass.
Rick?
Okay. As a professional economist, whatever the hell that means, let me assure you, if any of you have in doubt, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm the product of the elite American education. I went to Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. It's like a joke. I'm a poster boy for that shit. And mostly it was nonsense and crap. And many of you may have some respect for these institutions. Believe me, you shouldn't. Nothing goes on there that you should have much. It's like colleges anywhere else, except they hype themselves and spend a lot of money making you think higher of them than they deserve. I've been a student there. I've been a professor there. It's a fraud, like so many things. All right, that's the first thing. Second thing, I occasionally get together with my classmates because we became friends going through the process and so forth. So my friends include one of the two women that was in the economics PhD program. It was all men. All the professors were men, but there were two women. And so I remember, obviously, because they were the two women in the room. And one of them went through the same courses I did, took the same class with the same professor, read the same books, passed the same exams. I know exactly what she learned because it was the same thing I learned. You know her name. Her name is Janet Yellen. Okay? So I get together with folks like that from time to time to have a beer or a coffee or something. And here's what we don't agree on how the United States got into its current situation, and we don't agree on how it should go out, where it should go from here. But here's something we agree on that I want you to think about. We all agree on the following sentence. This is the worst condition of American capitalism in our lifetimes, no question.
Yay!
Yes. When Blair, in his opening remarks, Blair, I don't know if you remember, you said very wisely, it was a joke. I don't remember exactly your words, but the system may implode or fall of its own weight, I think was your phrase. That's not so far off, friends. In 2005, the US dollar represented 67% of the reserves of all central banks around the world, the currency of the world. Today, it's about 46%. That's the end. The Americans lost the war in Vietnam, lost the war in Afghanistan, lost the war in Iraq, and they're in the process of losing the one in Ukraine. It's done. It's over. The empire is on its down. Like every other empire, it went up. Good ride for the US, much of us. We went up and it peaked and it's going down. And when an empire goes down, it's rough on the people in it. They don't want to see it. They're afraid of it. Denial is the major approach at the first level. That's where we are. This system is in terrible trouble. The war in Ukraine has brought together Russia, China, India, South Africa, Brazil. Every day, more and more are joining the other bloc. The United States hasn't had an economic competitor for a century. Russia never was an economic competitor, political danger and ideological. Let me give you a simple economic statistic. The statistic we use to measure how strong an economy is called the GDP, gross domestic product. It's the total amount of goods and services coming out of an economy each year. So in the most recent year, what is the GDP of Russia? I'll tell you, 1.7 trillion bucks. What is the GDP of the United States last year? 21.5 trillion. You understand, Russia and the United States is David and Goliath. And you're not going to be happy on which is which. There is no contest here. There never was economically. That's an illusion of the United States PR system. But there is a country whose GDP last year was $17 trillion. And that country is the People's Republic of China. That's the competitor on every level. And they're winning. And they have been for 25 years. And there's no indication that's going to stop. And what you're watching is a government flailing around, poking in Taiwan, maybe to create a thing there. Fighting in Ukraine, that's not a fight against Russia. That's a fight against China. And that's losing. It was supposed to weaken Russia, bring Russia to its knees. Didn't do anything of the sort. And we keep pretending that it's all going all right. It isn't. And I believe further and further economic troubles are coming our way. Big ones. And the people who run this society are going to try to offload the pain onto the masses, just like Macron is doing with the pensions in France. When the crisis matures, which I think it is going to be doing much more in a matter of months than in years, We have to be as developed, and I think Edget is exactly right. We have to be as developed with our alternative as possible, because as it crumbles, people are going to be looking. And we don't have to be worried. We don't have to have all the details worked out. We don't have all the wrinkles ironed out. The worker co-op is a beautiful image. With all of its warts, it's a way forward, a way to go. That's what we have to spread. Don't let the other side tell us we have to work out. There's a problem here. This might not work. Sure, there's problems. We're not ending all economic problems. We're going to have troubles in co-ops. All co-ops I know, including those I'm a part of, are full of conflicts and tensions. But it's a different framework. Ending the monarchy didn't give us a society without tension. We have tensions in our parliamentary system, but it was still a good idea to get rid of the kings and to substitute. I think we're in a strong position because we even have an idea. As this system falls apart, people are going to go, if you pardon me, crazy. They're going to rediscover white supremacy. They're going to rediscover all those scary things we all see going on. And demagogic politicians are going to take advantage of every opportunity to ride that thing into office, Trump, etc. We have an alternative. We already have it pretty well worked out. I know we feel frustrated that it isn't worked out further. Fair enough. Let's do a better job. Let's develop it. But we got something in a situation where more and more people are looking for it. Otherwise, I can't explain myself. A Marxist economist, I do a weekly radio and TV show. It goes to millions and millions of homes. We get more mail and stuff than we can handle. Our situation, and I'm not saying anything different I said 10, 20 years ago. 10, 20 years ago, nobody was interested. I say the same shit now. Everybody thinks it's like a symphony. It's wonderful. That's not me. It's got nothing to do with me. Luckily, it's got to do with a changed environment that makes this stuff coming out of my mouth seem to strike people as interesting. But that's a good clue that we're not as troubled. And I know I can't predict the future anybody else. Blair may turn out to be right. The collapse comes, the transition we hope for foreclosed. Possible. Of course it's possible. But I'm not sure that we don't have a reasonable shot at getting that transition going to avoid and evade the catastrophe.
Rick, thank you so much. Thank you all so much. This 90 minutes has flown by. I can tell you that we have time for closing remarks. So I am going to go in this order: Michelle, Edget, Blair, and then Rick for the final thoughts. And a remembrance of the final thoughts is to really encourage you, based on what you've heard from each other. There's been an incredible discussion going on in the chat. I hope you'll save it and take a look at it. But what is to be done, right? Final thoughts, and I'm going to encourage you to share with our many viewers, and we know like literally hundreds and thousands more will see the recording. Any suggestions, advice, formations, organizations, books? I'm going to start with you, Michelle. What is to be done?
There's such a giant question. I'm the only thing that I'm going to say is just organize where you are within your geographic area, fortify your relationships with people, develop that level of trust that you're going to need for the times to come, develop your mutual aid projects, and just organize where you are. And of course, be connected in these spaces that are spanning, the US and globally, right? Because this is a global reality that we're facing. But spend the work and put in the effort to connect with the people who are around you. And I'll pass from there.
Edget?
Okay, so I'll just talk about what Community Movement Builders is doing. I mean, that's why I'm doing it, because I think it's what needs to be done. And it includes having worker cooperatives, doing mutual aid that helps people survive now and into the future, organizing oppressed people and workers in resistant campaigns and then bringing them in to do deeper political education, and networking with things like the People's Network for Land and Liberation and other folks that are, committed to the same vision for our future. And I mean, we're open to some sort of party formation too, although we haven't, there's not one yet. But so I think all of those things, working locally, building the alternatives, and connecting with each other.
Blair?
So, yeah, let me first say, I phrased that last question as incendiary as I could make it in order to kind of drive conversation. I don't believe that the end is here. However, I do think we're in a race. And in order to cover the number of people in need with the necessary speed, I think we're going to have to maximize with some intentionality the way we're going about it. And, I agree with Michelle, a couple degrees of freedom, somebody who knows everything we're trying to do is immediately accessible and willing to be supportive. And so, I think the critical thing is building that connective network and tissue so that we're not reinventing the wheel. And so that we're cross-fertilizing expertise, because we don't have a whole lot of time to waste in terms of providing an opportunity for people to see that there is an alternative. So I would say, I am encouraged by the brilliant work that's represented, everything I heard over the weekend and folks have been working with. But I do think we need to be real intentional about organizing ourselves to be able to have impact, because this isn't a long-term game. Pass.
Rick?
Well, I agree with literally everything that I've heard from all of you. All I can add is my sense that we all know, just as Blair said, that we need to, and there's lots of terms, cross-fertilize, get together, share our knowledge. I mean, we know we need a unified way to work together, to help each other, teach each other, learn from each other. Let's do it. We have been talking about the need for unity on the left. We have models around us of unity being created. That's why I told the story about France. It is possible. We have been talking about it. And that's why I'm fairly confident that if we add that with the urgency of Blair's focus on speed, and I agree with him about it, then I think we ought to do it. We ought to bite the bullet. More Americans today are either disgusted or disaffected with Republicans and Democrats than in my lifetime. So we know, based on even the experience of Bernie or of AOC or the other who are trying at least a little bit to move in the right. Look at they get reelected. They get millions of people who don't mind the label socialist, despite 75 years of all the Cold War propaganda we've all lived through. I think it's capable. Let's, in the name of the speed Blair advocates, let's do that in the hopes that it helps all of the particular projects we're focused on to be stronger and more effective. That's the point of the unity, not to displace, not to outshine, not to disrespect the different and local activities, but to help them, to support them, to be a way for them to be stronger. I think that's a basis on which we could get together, and man, the speed Blair emphasizes is an argument that we should now do it. I'm reminded of the 60s. I don't remember who said it, but it went something like this. The job of the revolutionary is to make the revolution. Okay, we're all doing it in our particular ways. Let's add to that focus, not substitute, add to it, a coming together. That would be my hope for the future.
So I want to thank Professor Rick Wolff. I want to thank Blair Evans, Edget, Betru, Michelle, Eddleman, McCormick, who have been such incredible thinkers, doers, and in this case, conversationalists. And I'm going to take this moment to do my dead level best to channel our dear friend and comrade, Kali Akuno, and the build and fight formula. To the best of my ability, somebody who I think is both a friend and a mentor, and really such a thinker and doer. In Build and Fight, Kali constantly says, we have to meet people's material needs, tangible and concrete. Show, don't tell that their life will be better when they come and rock with us. How do we do that? By liberating the land. Land for both food production and distribution using indigenous or food sovereignty principles, and for housing as a fundamental human right, not as a commodity, as a fundamental human right. And then we build co-ops and worker-owned cooperatives, not just producer or consumer co-ops, worker-owned cooperatives. But he says, not co-ops for the sake of co-ops. We literally, with those co-ops, are doing commerce, right? We're literally creating the things that people need and showing them and letting them own their own time, their own body, their own thought, literally own ourselves. And then through the co-op, we have the experience of democracy. We feel what it's like to collectively make and implement decisions with all of the challenges that are going to come with that. And we do not pretend like it's going to be lovey-dovey, crunchy granola. There's going to be a lot of struggle, but we engage that struggle with a level of clarity and commitment, which brings us to the next part, which is that we make a commitment to community-driven production, taking what Blair is teaching us about digital production and integrating the permaculture within that digital production. And then in everything that we do, we integrate, we not in a power over, like you must read your Marx kind of way, but we integrate a kind of political education that helps people understand. I am one who believes everybody can understand economics. Everybody can understand revolutionary process. Everybody can understand this if we engage it in a thoughtful way. Again, as Kali says, we got to break it down, but we don't dumb it down. We tell the truth. We explain to them and we invite them into that conversation. And then the very last thing, infusing everything we do, art, culture, and play. Right? Culture is the sum total of everything that we do. Art is not an add-on, y'all. Art is a human right. And art is how we fully understand our humanity. So when we bring all those things together, that literally is living into the revolution. So, you know, Kali does it better than I do, right? But what you just heard is Cobb's interpretation or imitation of Kali Akuno.
Great job.
Thank you, Edget. Peace.
Thank you. Thank you. And do give Michelle, if you're going to see him soon, give Kali, you know, a boost from all of us that we wish him well and a quick return to the work that he does.
I will. I'm going to go in and see him now.
Love.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.